There are many questions surrounding how police are dealing with journalists as these protests take place. Many have been hit with rubber bullets and gas canisters, including some of our colleagues. It happened to senior correspondent Susan Ormiston last night. And our next guest has also been covering the protests in Minneapolis. She says police shot her with a projectile that has now left her blind in her left eye. Linda Tirado is a photojournalist and an author, and she joins us from Minneapolis. Linda, I want to thank you again for making time for us today, and I want to say I'm so sorry for what you've had to endure just for doing your job.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something that you really think I'm going to go take pictures and then I won't be able to see. But at least they got my, I take photos out of my right eye, so at least that's something.
All right. I want to know what the future is going to be like, but let's go back to Friday night. Help me understand. You're out there, you're covering the protests, you're doing what journalists do. What happened?
So Friday was the first night that Minneapolis had put a curfew in place. The curfew is meant to be at 8 p.m., and it was very clear that protesters would not be going home at that point. About 15 minutes prior to when the curfew was in place, I started to hear that they were firing tear gas without even issuing the standard dispersal warnings. So I kind of headed in that direction to see what was happening. I was somewhere near the 3rd precinct. I don't know exactly what streets I was on. And the police were in front of me. Protesters were kind of scattered. It was a bit chaotic. And I was lining up a photo, and then my world kind of exploded. So I immediately realized that I'd been hit in the face with something, and my face started to swell, and there was too much blood I couldn't see. So I just closed my eyes and started yelling, I'm press, I'm press. And protesters came and pulled me, put me in a van, got me to a hospital. I was in surgery within an hour. And the result of that is that I've permanently lost sight in my eye, and I'm an uninsured American facing down 3 major eye surgeries. So that's a good, fun, extra little bit. But the upside is I got a COVID test. So all you have to do in the States to get a COVID test is get your eyeball exploded, I guess.
Oh my gosh.
I'm negative for the plague. I'm negative for the plague. It's beautiful.
Well, I'm so glad you got a sense of humor in all of this. I imagine it's going to help you get through what is no doubt a challenging time, an adjustment time for you. And help me understand, is this permanent now? You are never going to see out of your left eye again?
Correct. They tell me I might be able to see some light and shadow, but I'll never be able to, cover my right eye and tell you what I'm looking at, and differentiate the difference between, say a dog and a tree. Those things will largely be impossible out of my left eye from now. But it is unfortunately a reality of American journalism that more and more often those of us that cover civil unrest are facing the same risks as you would see conflict journalists that cover war zones. And this injury is just, one more thing to prove that. And I'm not the only journalist that's been injured or arrested or gassed or, hit by the police. I think my injury might be, one of the worst that we've seen in this particular set of protests to this point, which is not to say that somebody else won't get hurt worse tomorrow.
Linda, help me understand, do you think this is intentional? Is this intentional targeting of the press, of journalists?
I'm going to be very careful in my phrasing here, but what I would say is that when police feel happy to arrest national news crews during a live shot, as happened on Thursday night when they picked up an entire CNN crew that was on air, we know that certainly some police departments do target journalists. We saw that a lot in St. Louis during Ferguson, because largely, if you're going to do something that is going to anger people, you don't want a record of it. And so, tactically speaking, getting journalists out of the fray and out of commission is a good way to make sure that nobody sees what you're doing to the civilian populace.
How are, not physically, but emotionally, how are you feeling right now?
Ask me again in a week. I don't think it's sunk in yet. I've only woken up blind for 2 days in a row, and I imagine it's going to be worse, in a couple of weeks when I'm back home in my own bed. Because at this point, I'm still living, on location in unreality, reporting as much as I can. And the thing about reporting from a location is you get this like mental bubble of I'm on location, and anything you see that's traumatizing, you kind of deal with that later when you're home. As at this point, I'm still making as many jokes as I can, because complaining doesn't change what has happened, but my work might make it so that this doesn't happen to another journalist. And so for me, I'm really focusing on, doing everything I can right now, as long as I'm able, because I think that makes more of a difference than focusing on what's gone wrong with me personally.
Where is home? Where do you go back to when all this is done?
I live in Nashville. Yeah, I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
Is anyone with you right now?
Yeah, I'm staying with a friend. My ex-husband has absolutely guaranteed me that I'm not allowed to work, and he's flying up because I drove up here, so he's going to take me in the car home. But he knows me very well, and so he issued a strong directive as the father of my children that I'm not allowed to take any more photos until he gets here, which I think is probably wise. I'm going to listen to him for once.
And your kids, I imagine you've told your kids what's happened?
They're 7 and 9, and so they know that mommy got hurt and daddy's going to go pick her up, but that everybody is okay. We thought we would wait, until I look a little less scary to really explain to them what's going on. Thankfully, they're young enough that as long as I'm there and making mac and cheese at lunchtime, they're not really going to register it as a problem. Hopefully this isn't trauma to them. Best we can do.
What do you think happens next? I'm sorry, I'm just so upset that this has happened to you. Where do we go from here?
It's upsetting, because what you find is that in the States, for instance, the use of tear gas is banned for use in international war, but we're happy to use it on our civilian populace. And things like targeting journalists are considered to be war crimes. But when it's not a technical war, when it's a internal emergency state, those rules and those norms go out the window. So it is really upsetting to see something that you would be outraged by if it were committed during a war, just kind of considered to be completely normal. And here, due to a series of Supreme Court decisions, and I don't want to get into the weeds, police are by and large free and immune from things like this, if they can say that they were at all in fear for their life, which, certainly during an escalating protest, that's a claim that the courts will consider to be standard. What nobody is going to tell you is that it's the police that are escalating the protests. That, previously peaceful protests go absolutely chaotic once the police move in and start using chemical weapons and firing indiscriminately into crowds. That's when the rage really boils over and you start to really see things go south. So, I think it is disheartening to see these sorts of things. Like if it were me looking at another journalist, I would certainly, feel a bit of a chilling effect. And I think that that's part of the reason that journalists are being targeted all over, is that they just want to be clear. And, certainly that's part of our political moment as well, where our president is out there, saying that journalists are the problem. A lot of people believe that, and a lot of people do trust in the authority that we have. So, I don't blame you. I would have a hard time formulating questions for an interview like this as well, honestly.
Do you want someone to be held accountable, responsible for what happened to you?
Yes, but not one individual. I don't think that there's one individual, even to include whoever pulled the trigger, because the problem is systemic. What I would like to see is the power structures that keep allowing police to kill Black and brown people in this country with impunity. I would like that to change. I would like, if we see somebody murdered in broad daylight, for that person to be prosecuted, even if they're a police officer. I want things to change, but it has to be systemic, because it doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring anybody any justice. It doesn't, change the norms around here if the one cop that pulled the trigger on me winds up getting a ding on his service record and the city has to pay me my medical bills. Like, that doesn't change anything. So, I mean, yes, I would like to see accountability, but I would like to see systemic, broad accountability for all of the people who are being injured by an increasingly militarized police force. The fact that there's MRAPs and Bearcats and sniper rifles when you're dealing with the civilian population, to me, is just mind-blowing. And that's the thing I'd like to see changed.
It sounds, because we're supposed to walk a line, right? Not supposed to have opinions, not necessarily advocating for something, but it sounds pretty clear to me, and perhaps justifiably considering what you're going through, that you have a very clear perspective on how this needs to be handled and what's wrong in this situation. Do you worry
that you can be fair? I think that you can be fair and also look at reality. And I think that the data tells us what's going on, and that the push to be, unbiased and the push to get both sides actually is doing a disservice to journalism, because we have the facts and figures, we have the numbers, we know what's happening, and to say that it's not seems to me to be more of a political statement than it is to point at what's happening. And make that really clear. So I absolutely do not I don't have time for the argument that I need to be fair. What I need to be is truthful. And I think that if you stick to the data and you stick to the facts, then truth is easy to find. It becomes less clear when you're trying to make truth not hurt and you're trying to make truth pretty, because the truth here is not pretty. People are dying in the streets. I just had my eye put out. This is not a pretty subject. And to try to make it more palatable, I think, does a disservice to journalism.
Linda, again, I'm at a loss for words, but thankfully you are cogent enough to understand why that is. But I really, again, want to thank you so much. I'm, again, very sorry that this has happened to you. I'm glad your ex-husband is coming to get you and hopefully take care of you in the midst of all this.
I picked a good man to be my second husband. I'm just saying that.
Okay, well, that is good to hear. Listen, take care of yourself. I'm glad you're with friends. I hope things get sorted. Please stay in touch with us, and maybe if you're in Toronto, we'll have you in here when this pandemic is done.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Post-plague, the world will look different.
It sure will. Linda, you take care of yourself, and thank you again.
Absolutely.
Linda Tirado is a photojournalist and an author, and she joined us from Minneapolis.